Hey everybody, and welcome back to another week of From Guy Cooking, where this week we're going to be making minestrone soup and garlic bread. Minestrone soup is a thick soup. It's of Italian origin. It's made with vegetables, has a tomato base, and usually has pasta added to it as well. First up, you'll need 2 stalks of celery, 2 carrots, 1 onion, 2 cloves of garlic, 2 potatoes, 4 tablespoons of margarine or earth balance, some cabbage, some parsley, salt, a 15-ounce can of cannellini beans, or a similar white bean, some tomato paste, a 15-ounce can of stewed tomatoes, and 32 ounces of vegetable broth. Also, you can use chicken broth or even beef broth if you want it to have a heavier, more meaty taste. And lastly, we'll add some elbow macaroni, but that's going to come much later. Now, this music doesn't really seem appropriate for making such a wonderful Italian dish, so let's switch over to something more like this. Go ahead and chop up your carrots into thin little wedges, similar size for your celery. And then again, you're going to do the same thing for the onion. Small chunks, not quite minced, just chopped well. We're going to be sauteing these vegetables before we add the other ingredients. Finally, you're going to mince the garlic. If you want to see how to mince garlic, if you don't know how, you can go back to the episode where I made eggplant dip, where I go through more intensely how to mince garlic. Now go ahead and melt down those 4 tablespoons of earth balance in a large stock pot, and then use that melted earth balance to saute the onions, carrots, celery, and garlic. Let that saute for about 10 minutes, and in the meantime prepare your other ingredients. Cube your potatoes into nice little chunks, and then make sure all your cans are open and the soup stock is ready. After about 10 minutes or so of the vegetable sauteing, go ahead and add the cabbage from earlier with the cubed potatoes, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 2 tablespoons of dried parsley, and even though I forgot to show it, you should add a teaspoon of salt at this point. The full can of the stewed tomatoes and the can of cannellini beans. And pour that vegetable stock, or if you're using chicken stock or whatever stock you're using, into the pot. Once you've done this, just give it a good mix, let all those flavors and ingredients get to know each other a little, cover it up, and once it boils, let it simmer for an hour. Once the soup has simmered for an hour, give it another mix, and add half a cup of the elbow macaroni. Mix it in, cover the pot, and again, let it sit for another half hour. And now when you open the pot, your soup is done. And what could go better with some delicious minestrone soup than a crunchy chunk of homemade garlic bread? We're going to make a really simple bread recipe. Take 1 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast and incorporate that into a cup of warm water. While those ingredients are being fused, add half a teaspoon of salt to 2 cups of flour. Then using your hand, mix all of those ingredients together until a nice sticky dough forms. It should form one cohesive ball. In this case, I needed to add a little more warm water, but once I did that, the dough came together really nicely, even though it did kind of happen off camera. Slide the bowl back into the frame, cover it with a towel, and let it sit for an hour and a half. After an hour and a half, the dough is puffed up. Pull the edges of the dough away from the sides of the bowl towards the middle of the dough. Then give it a few pokes with your finger to let it deflate, recover it, and let it sit for another hour and a half. An hour and a half later, and we have this beautiful sticky dough ready to go. Before we form this dough into its final loaf shape, you'll want to throw some flour down on your counter, as this dough is fairly sticky. Also get some of that flour on your hands so that it doesn't stick to your hands too much when you're pulling it out of the bowl and onto the counter. Sprinkle a few handfuls of flour on top of the dough and work it just a little bit before you start working it into the shape of a ball, pulling from the sides down into the bottom, pulling 4 corners of dough and pinching them on the bottom into a ball shape. Throw a little olive oil down into a bowl, wipe the bowl down with a paper towel to make sure the olive oil covers the entire surface, and sprinkle the bowl with a few sprinkles of flour. We really want this bowl to be stick-proof. Then put the dough ball down in the middle and sprinkle that as well with some flour. This is going to sit for 45 minutes. During these 45 minutes, preheat a 3-quart Dutch oven at 450 degrees. Oh, and the Dutch oven has to be covered while you're preheating it. 45 minutes later, the dough has risen yet for a third time. It'll easily slide out of the bowl. And now take out your Dutch oven, which is very hot, so be careful, and just drop the dough inside. Put the dough in the oven for a half hour at 450 degrees, and then uncover it for the last 15 or 20 minutes or so of baking, until it comes out looking like this. Let it sit for at least a half an hour before cutting into it. Now, it can be hard to know exactly when a loaf of bread is done. Here's someone who can explain pretty well when your bread is ready to be taken out of the oven.
How do you tell a good bread is without tasting it? Not the smell, not the look, but the sound of the crust. Listen. Oh, a symphony of crackle. Only great bread sound this way.
Well, is this loaf great? Does it have a symphony of crackle? You tell me. If not a symphony, then that's at least a 4-piece band. While the bread is cooling, let's go ahead and make the garlic part of this garlic bread. Take a 1/4 cup of olive oil, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, and 1½ teaspoons of dried parsley. Now this is a very simple garlic bread recipe, and it might not be as genuine as one made with real garlic, but it's still quite delicious. Slice your loaf in half, and take a look at that cross-section while congratulating yourself on making a real loaf of bread. Go ahead and cut the bread now into 6 or 8 nice thick slices. Once this is done, just take a brush and brush down each slice very well with the olive oil, garlic, parsley mixture. Once you've done that, throw it in a 350-degree oven for about 15 minutes, and you're done. You've just made homemade garlic bread. And here we see the finished product, some delicious, crusty, crunchy garlic bread with a bowl of piping hot minestrone soup. Until next week, take care. I hope you enjoy.